As we get started, this debate will use a traditional format. The order of speaking will be in alphabetical order, and Jeff Bragman will be speaking first and will be the first to respond to the first question. Each candidate will have 1 minute for an opening statement. Each candidate will then have up to 2 minutes to respond to each question and will have 1 minute for a closing statement. In addition, each candidate has a red card. So you all have them. And a red card can be used 2 times during the debate to allow a candidate to speak for up to 1 minute, out of order, out of turn, in response to something one of the other candidates has said. The ground rules for the audience are as follows. We ask you not to applaud or vocalize approval or disapproval during the debate. We do have very little time and many questions, and this type of audience participation cuts into the time available to the candidates. We ask that you submit as many questions as you can. This debate is to help you get to know the candidates and to give the candidates an opportunity to inform you, the voters, of their position on the issues. We will now begin the opening statements, and Jeff Bragman will speak first.
You can speak there. Oh, there's no.
I'm not gonna go.
Oh,
That's what I thought.
Oh, I
I was told.
okay.
Are we staying here or are we going up?
I thought we don't have
You want me to stay
mics
here?
over there?
We do.
Okay, okay, I heard the podium is where we were going. It's the lawyer in me. Is it on automatically?
The mute button. The mute button. That's the on off.
Yes, a thorough professional.
There you go.
Now I think it's on.
Yeah, it's on.
No, doesn't sound like.
This is Jeff Bragman's. Okay? It's on, but Jeff is very shy.
I'm not sure.
Hold it right up to your
That's the
mouth.
mute button.
I will. Good evening. Thanks for everybody being present. I only have a minute. I'm Jeff Bragman. I'm always talking about town board issues and happy to do it. And that's probably why I was endorsed by 2 good friends, Larry Campwell and Fred Thiel. I want to tell you tonight that East Hampton, for me, is not a reality TV show. It's not a brand name. It's a real community of real people. And for more than 30 years, I've been a working dad here, and I'm running for town board for one simple reason. East Hampton is my home, and I want to protect it. And I believe that we all are entitled to have a future for our kids here. Over the years, I've done a lot of battling to preserve our natural resources and our history, because they are things to me that matter more than money. My work requires me to listen to local residents, and increasingly I notice that many folks are uneasy about the power of money and the fact that it may drive us out of our small town life. And I believe that the workings of our small government and the honest rule of law are the best tools that we have to preserve this community. I know that if we lower our voices, we can raise our expectations to get things done. We may be a small town, but we can do big things, and I'd like to help. Thank you.
I'm going to use this one because it's
Thank
on.
you. Kathy?
I'm going to stay seated because I'm wired here to my toe bag, so I don't have the flexibility of standing up. So first I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters, the Group for Good Government, and the East Hampton Library for sponsoring tonight's event. And good evening, everyone. I'm Kathee Burke-Gonzalez. I'm running for re-election to the East Hampton Town Board, having been endorsed by the Democratic, Independents, and Working Families Party. And I should mention I'm the only incumbent running for Town Board. I live in Springs with my husband, Joe Gonzalez, my 19-year-old son, Burke, and my 17-year-old daughter, Nina. As a mother, I am both excited and a little fearful about the challenges my children would face. And as a daughter whose mom is 95 years old, she turned 95 in July, I know what it's like to take care of a parent who is aging. I bring these life experiences as a caregiver and as a working mom to my job in Town Hall every day. And I believe that my service over the last 4 years on the Town Board and 9 years on the Spring School Board has proven my dedication to this community and understanding of this community. And I ask for your support in the upcoming election on September 12th.
Okay, Zach?
I want to thank the League of Women Voters, a group of good government, and the East Hampton Library for hosting this debate. And I want to thank all of you for coming so I could speak to you directly. Almost 26 years ago, Pamela and I moved to East Hampton. We fell in love with the beauty of its built and its natural environment. Most of my volunteer work has centered upon preserving and protecting our land and our waters. 15 years ago, I was put on the town's Nature Reserve Committee, and I've been its chair for the past 9 years. I also serve as representative for environmental advocacy groups on a county committee. But the most meaningful part of my life has been the connection to a community filled with people who care about each other and care about our town. It's time to set our sights on preserving our community and the people and the traditions that have shaped it. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we will begin the questioning. Kathee, do you have the first question?
I do. Our mics are- There are near universal complaints about poor cell phone reception and access throughout the town. What can the town government do to solve this long-standing problem? You may want to address the Springs Firehouse and Iacono Farm.
I actually think I have the first question. I'm a little ambivalent about the cell tower that was built at the firehouse. And I know that it's been, the method that they followed to get it approved has been challenged and is in court. I'd like to see towers that are hidden, but they've got to be hidden in a way that doesn't change the architecture or the meaning and the traditions of the buildings that we have. So it becomes a little bit of a problem to hide them. And I think really it's a balance between the convenience of cell phones, which we all want, and protecting the things that we love about East Hampton. I know that I was involved in a case where they wanted to change the molding on a church, and they were, they promised that they would duplicate the molding, but they were going to use a material that couldn't deteriorate. And I don't think it's a good idea. I'd like to try to keep the town as the way it looks to the maximum extent possible, and I think I'd rather have a little bit of inconvenience over tampering with that. So I think we got to be very careful about what we do with cell phone towers. And I don't love it on Two Holes of Water when I drop calls, though, I have to say. It's inconvenient.
Thank you. Well, I live in Springs, which I said earlier, and for years when I would have to go outside on my patio in order to take a cell phone call. And it was particularly challenging when there were leaves on the trees. It was better when there was no leaves, and it was really inconvenient when it was raining. So as far as the town board is concerned, we are actually, you may have heard, we're doing a capital project. We're upgrading our emergency communication system because not only do we have problems with cell service, but our fire department, our police department, and our EMS are struggling too. Our system right now is 20 years old. It only has 5 channels, and they no longer make the parts for the equipment. During the Sag Harbor fire that we experienced in December, 143 busy signals came up because of the fact that there were only 5 channels on that system. So now we're putting together a new system. It's going to have 12 channels. We've coordinated with the village of Sag Harbor, the village of East Hampton, the town, and the 5 fire departments. Because we're putting in this new communication system, we need service in Springs. So we are looking right now for a location in Springs for a tower, and we've reached out to the county and have expressed to them that we also need a location in Montauk for the tower so that we can have the service that we need.
Thank you. I want to relate a true story that a gentleman who hit his head and was semi-unconscious and was able to pull out his cell phone and could get no reception. And he was rather scared. Fortunately, he only was woozy, and 15, 20 minutes later was able to get up and move to a place outside the house where he could make a call. We need better cell phone service, first and foremost, just as a health and safety issue. When I speak to the Springs firemen, they say, I sleep with my cell phone in the window because that's the only way I'm going to get a call. Yes, the convenience of me not having to walk outside, because I live in Springs also, and make a phone call is important. So we do need, this is mandatory, we have to have better cell service. We should be also looking ahead at some of the technologies that are being used, say in cities, where they use more, but say less obtrusive cell towers and have redundancy. And that is an area where the town can get involved, look at the planning, have the planning department update the very, very old study of it. Thank you.
Okay, we're now ready for the second question from Steve.
A perennial problem is the lack of affordable housing from both a practical and ethical point of view. There was a seemingly ideal site 2 years ago in Wainscott, but it was not carried to completion. What is your opinion of that, and what can be done to create affordable units?
Kathee, you begin.
Thank you. I happen to be the liaison to the Wainscott CAC, so we talked about this at quite some length. Unfortunately, there was a lot of pushback from the community because of the one-room schoolhouse in Wainscott. I've toured the schoolhouse. It's, has the capability of housing about 25 students, and I believe now they have about 28 students in the school. So there was a great deal of pushback. We also heard from folks in the Georgica Pond area that they were concerned about the water there because the travel time and how close it is to the pond. The good news now is that the town has just put into place new legislation for low nitrogen sanitary systems. So moving forward, water shouldn't be an issue and wastewater treatment shouldn't be an issue. But as far as affordable housing is concerned, everywhere I go, people tell me the need for affordable housing. But unfortunately, when it gets proposed, people really don't want it in their neighborhood. They're concerned about their school and their taxes and things like that. And I think what I would ask is that we need to open our hearts and we need to move forward with more affordable housing in this community.
Thank you. I'm happy to hear that we do now have wastewater treatment systems that would work in a large project in Wainscott, and I think one of the first things I'd want to do is reopen the possibility of putting that there. Yes, the school is always an issue wherever it is. I had spoken to quite a number of people in the school boards on both sides. The sense I got is that if we could work out that the extra students who go to the East Hampton schools, as long as they were paid for by Wainscott, that would very likely be acceptable. I think that should be explored. In general, on affordable housing, without affordable housing, we actually even losing jobs. I know a business that closed, not because we couldn't find employees, is that the employees couldn't find the housing. We are losing our volunteer fire department, and essentially this is what I talked about in my opening, is a loss of the community. I'd like to see as a totally something that would cost no money. The town needs to review all of the parcels in town and put on more affordable housing overlays. And I think we need to keep working on the affordable accessory apartment law to make it work for more people.
Thank you. And they now have another question. Oh,
No,
Jeff's
no,
gotta
Brad,
answer.
Jeff's gotta go. Jeff has to go.
Hi.
No free passes.
I actually was very disappointed by what happened in Wainscott, and I never really bought the explanation about the school. I love that little school and I want to protect it. I know I see some people here who are very concerned about that, and I'm a guy who believes very strongly in historic preservation and retaining the fabric of our community. But I thought the plan was a good plan for Wainscott. I thought the pushback from the community was not credible, and I would have liked to have seen it happen. I would vote for it again if it came up, and I think we should have pushed a little harder on it, frankly. I don't think we give in when the community balks at something like that. I have a 29-year-old son, and he's at that age, that young adult age, where he's trying to figure out what he's going to do for a career, and this affordable housing is an issue that affects him and me personally, because there are a lot of his friends that would like to stay in East Hampton. And one of the components, not the only component, but one of the components is being able to find affordable housing. And the Democrats have made some great strides, but I can't say, I think the Wainscott situation was a swing and a miss and a strikeout, and I think it should come back.
Okay, thank you. Now, Kathee.
hold on.
Yeah, can I just say,
Oh, Rick
sorry.
Hart?
What I do want to say is that we're going to be breaking ground very shortly on the Acabonic Manor House project. It is a model project. It's going to be 3 manor houses. Each manor house contains a 1-bedroom, 2 2-bedrooms, and a 3-bedroom. We're doing it as condos, so people can, young people can get in and have home ownership. The model can be used as rental apartments. It can be used as, again, as home ownership. And we've been looking around the community and are working on rolling it out into other parcels. Thank you. Who's next?
Next.
Okay.
Thanks.
Question?
There have been discussions for years on the merits of a town manager. It provides for professional, non-political administration, freeing elected officials for policy and strategic matters. Larry Cantwell acted in a similar capacity for the village of East Hampton for many years, to everyone's great satisfaction. What is your attitude towards the implementation of such a system? Would you be a supporter?
I'm going to open and close with a statement that leaders are elected and managers are hired. I think anybody who's followed me and either the GGG or the League of Women Voters knows I've sat on 2 forums, I believe, advocating for a town manager. I still believe that's the case. As a person who has done quite a number of projects, even though I haven't been on the town board, you recognize that you need institutional knowledge, which is often lost in changes of administrations. You need help working across departments. Very often you do get individuals that are leaders and good managers. Peter is an example, an excellent one, especially like with Tony Littman in the buildings department, and Kathee, I've worked with some on the airport, but in general, we are elected as leaders. And having a manager gives you the opportunity to devote most of your time on the policy. If you've ever tried to work on the airport, you can easily be reading hundreds and hundreds of pages in a month, and you don't have a lot of time left. I personally feel without a town manager, I get a lot done, and with a town manager, get twice as much done. And so I will close with what I said is leaders are elected and managers are hired.
Thank you. Jeff?
Yeah, I understand that leaders are elected and managers are hired, which is why I don't think I favor the appointment of a town manager. I frankly think handling the purse strings and figuring out how your policies fit into those purse strings are something I want in the hands of somebody who's accountable at election pretty regularly and frequently. Frankly, I want to be able to boot somebody out or put somebody in if things aren't going well. And there are problems about hiring somebody who's an expert to handle all your budgeting, and it involves a sort of a subtle shift of power because that person does become very powerful in the local government. And frankly, I don't want somebody who's perhaps a financial whiz and sort of got that narrow view handling the most important function of government. For me, I don't see a separation, between social policy and fiscal policy. And sometimes I've heard, I think, from Mr. Cohen that he feels differently about each of those positions. I think that your social policy is so intimately connected with how you handle the finances. We should have it in the hands of people who are accountable, that we can cheer like we do with Larry Cantwell, or we can say, you're done with other people. I just think it's safer for us and we're more in control.
Where's my red card?
Red card.
Okay. So one of the things that's very important to recognize is that there's a very large difference between a town government and a village government. And a village government is a mayoral kind of system, and what Larry was in the village had a lot of power. The town manager in a town would essentially not assume any of that important legal responsibilities unless there was a townwide referendum, and I would not want that. The budget officer would still remain working for the supervisor. In a town, the supervisor is the chief financial officer, and that would fully remain. So in a town system, unless there's a townwide referendum, what I'm advocating for is essentially something we almost already have now. We have two division heads. We have a division head of finance, we have a division head of public safety who work across many departments. I'm just advocating we would expand those to almost all the departments.
Kathee?
Okay, thank you. I mean, we've been very fortunate to have as our town supervisor, Larry Cantwell, who has 42 years of public service, 32 years in the village as the village administrator. When Larry came on, he brought as his executive assistant Alex Walter, and for those of you that know Alex, he had a great deal of managerial experience. So we were in really well suited for the changes that we've made and the way that we've handled the finances in the town. As everybody knows, we had a press release that go out recently that Moody's gave us a AAA rating. It's the highest rating that Moody's gives, and it's the highest the town obviously has ever received. I believe that the next supervisor should make that decision whether they want a town manager or not. I believe they should have that decision, and if they were to move forward with the town manager, I would support that.
Thank you.
Next question.
We're on the next question.
I think
It goes to Jeff.
I think we're up to the next question.
Yeah.
Are you committed to all possible solutions for East Hampton to obtain meaningful airport noise relief? And if such relief is not forthcoming within a reasonable time, should the town close the airport in order to make the hundreds of acres available for alternate public purposes?
I'm glad to get that question. Because I think before anybody on this dais or anybody in this room was talking about airport noise, I was actually litigating the case, challenging the environmental review that the Republicans were using to try to force the town to take FAA funding. When I started talking airport noise, people would say to me, oh, you just want to make the properties around the airport more valuable. And we litigated that case for easily 5 years, maybe more than 5 years. And it's one of those instances of a law career where you lose the battle and win the war, because we didn't reverse what the town board had done. But in the course of the discussion, and I had, I think, something to do with changing the public discussion, public opinion caught up with what the facts were, and people began to realize that airport noise was harming thousands of people, thousands. And we had Noyak in rebellion, we had Sag Harbor in rebellion. We had Georgia in rebellion about what's going on. And you know what, over on Swamp Road, I'm a little in rebellion right now. So I am thoroughly committed to having local control of that airport. I never minded that airport for the many years that I drove past it when it was a quiet little airport. I'd love it if we could get it back to that. I want to get it back to that. The helicopters have no business in our community. The seaplanes also, very noisy. As to what to do, I'd rather fight it out. I like to think that the pilots are going to see the handwriting on the wall and begin to understand that if we really can't control that airport, they have to come to the table and make some deal with us. I can live with the airport, I think it's an asset to the community, but if we can't control it, we may find that what used to be an extreme position in the community becomes a majority position. And at that point, it is up to the town residents what they want to do. But right now, I'm willing to work on it and try to cut noise down.
Thank you. So when I was elected in November of 2013, shortly after that, the members of the new members of the board would get together and we'd talk about what we wanted to do moving forward, and we also decided what our liaison positions were going to be. So Peter, raised his hand, he wanted natural resources, and Sylvia wanted the planning department. So when it came to airport, nobody's hand went up, but mine. And Fred looked over and said, I guess you only want to be a one-term council person. And I said, well, maybe I'm naive, but I think that we, unfortunately we were struck down in the courts, but we put together a very strong public record. The federal district court found our curfews reasonable. We had two years of curfews in place at the airport. Unfortunately, now we're back to trying to get special legislation from our congressional delegation and we're exploring a Part 161 process. And there's a meeting on September 19th with a work session where we'll have our new attorneys from Morrison Foster come and talk to us about the ANCA Part 161 process. ANCA stands for the Airport Noise Capacity Act, and we have to file a very lengthy application and meet 6 very difficult, possibly difficult criteria in order to get the FAA to approve our restrictions. We're moving forward in that direction, and I invite the community to come to the meeting on 10 o'clock on September 19th. There is a call now for closing the airport. We know that there's an organization called Say No to KHTO. They're very active on social media. They come to town board meetings and talk during public comment, and they've taken out full-page ads in the paper. And as Jeff said, what once was considered an extreme position about closing the airport, if we can't get restrictions, reasonable restrictions in place, and we can't get the operators and the airport users to come around, and it could come a day where that airport would have to be closed.
So of all the questions that might have been asked, if you had asked this group of 3 to bring in all of our readings and papers on this topic, you would have had to hire a moving van. This is a very detailed question, but obviously very important, and we now have complaints running from Wainscott all the way to Montauk, and we even have some oppositions because the people in Montauk are concerned that restrictions we'll put on Wainscott are going to move helicopter flights out there. So it's become a very difficult issue, as it's always been, and one that I would love to work on and have been working on some. So on some specific issues. One, I think you also have to look at the fact that we not only have noise, we have a large amount of pollution caused by the planes, and that has to be factored in too when you're talking about the improvements in the goals. Another thing is unfortunately, without getting too much detail, legal efforts that you can put forth on helicopters may be quite reasonable and likely to succeed, but the same efforts may be far less likely to succeed for fixed wing, and then certain of the aircraft don't even come under procedural rules for control. So ultimately, we have to be attacking this problem from many aspects, and negotiations are definitely going to be part of it. The airport's not going to get closed under the next term, given the grand assurances that we have, but I think that when we go to the negotiating table, the other side already knows, and we have to make sure they understand that if there isn't cooperation, the people that will come after us, whether it's us or not, are going to very likely be looking at saying, okay, you cooked your own goose.
Rick Hart.
I just wanted to add something, not really by way of rebuttal, and that is that when we do this Part 161 study, which is something like an environmental impact study, it would be better for us to include the Montauk Airport. I want to say that because the Montauk people are very nervous and anxious that we're trying to generate traffic away from us and toward them. And if they're included in the Part 161 study, then they're protected. And just as a general aside about the airport, my inclination is that I'm not that worried about the folks who care the most about how quickly they can get in and out of East Hampton. I'm more worried about the folks who stick around. That's my general slant on the issue.
Thank you. Next question is for Kathee, and Kathee goes first.
We have a large Latino population that's largely absent from a political process. How would you bring that community into full participation in civic life here?
I will say from my 9 years on the school board, I know that it's been a challenge. In fact, the East Hampton High School, or the East Hampton School District has done a terrific job. They've hired a community outreach person and literally made calls to parents and got them to come to meetings and held special meetings in Spanish. And it's been a tremendous model, and it's been very successful. We have, I guess last year at some point we appointed a Latino advisory committee, and we were doing outreach with them. We were having special meetings. We'd had a meeting on the rental registry when that was launched, and we had a meeting on code enforcement, And unfortunately then, in January, when our new president came in and came out and said that we could deputize our local police force to be immigration officers, folks were very fearful. In fact, the public hearing that we had after that meeting, I have to say that it brought tears to my eyes when I heard people talking about what they were going through and what they were experiencing, and how they had to tell their children that they might not be there when they got home that night. So what we're finding now is the Latino Advisory Committee has not been meeting at Town Hall because they're not comfortable coming to our facility, and they're meeting, in someone's home, and it's challenging. And I think right now, for the time being, it's going to be a real challenge to get them to come to meetings.
Well, I've had the honor, I would say, and it's been a wonderful experience that, just through happenstance, I've been working a lot with the Latino community first because they didn't understand the difference between town government and school government. So they came to me and asked them to help them because they thought they were maybe some of their children being racially profiled. And I am on the Latino Advisory Committee, and not only can we can get citizens to Town Hall, but even people who are here legally but not citizens, we can't even get them into the church that much anymore, where we were holding meetings and forums on what to do. The stories that Kathee said are more than true. There have been some deportations. One of the founders of a charity called East End for Opportunity, where I guess a number of us woke up on November 9th last year and said, what does the town need? And a couple of us who found each other said it needs low-cost legal services, and we formed this charity. And two of the things we're doing, one was not connected to the Latino, but another minority group in town. We're doing wills for the African American community, but we do deportation documents, and people come and you see neighbors crying about their other neighbors, and when you have to talk to them about. But the community is here to stay. About 11% of the Democratic electorate is now Latino. They come to me and say, we want to be part of the community. They don't want gifts. They want to understand their responsibilities and take that role.
Jeff?
I remember when my son was in middle school, actually one of the higher grades, that this little boy came to the front door crying, and it turned out to be Ignacio. And Ignacio didn't speak any English, and I speak marginal Spanish, but somehow we communicated it. Somehow his ride to school didn't work, and we wound up taking him, and it turned out he lived quite near us and became my son's best friend over a number of years, until he was deported with his family, and we're still in touch with Ignacio. This is an issue, this is one of those issues where what's going on in the national world is really something that we have to think about. I mean, we spent a lot of time in East Hampton saying we don't have to worry about what's going on in these national issues, but this is an issue that really matters here. I mean, the idea that these good, hardworking neighbors who want only the same things that anybody else wants, they just want, a chance to make a life and have a home and work hard. These guys are working hard. Everybody in this room has hired Latino workers, and they're wonderful people, and they're a tremendous asset to our town. And I really think this is one of those times that we have to stand up against national policy in any way we can, encourage the police department not to target these people. There are more cases in these justice courts for driving without a license, and then they get jammed up with fines, and then they go to jail. It's just not right, and it's not justice. And we have to work with the cops and say, these people are part of our community and we want them here. They make us stronger and happier and more productive. So I really think we have to be strong and try to say that East Hampton is not going along with these crazy biased policies and these horrible epithets that are used for these hardworking immigrants, just like my grandparents, just like your grandparents.
Thanks, Jeff. Next question will be for Zach.
Other communities have permitted the building and operation of assisted living facilities, and East Hampton has none. We have an aging population, so the need is present. Do you acknowledge that need, and how specifically would you go about locating, permitting, and defining the size and height of such buildings?
We clearly have a need, and it was recognized by, I think it was called Kathee, the Seniors Committee that formed a few years ago, and it was discussed that, you know, there are a number of people who need to sell their larger home. Selling the larger home, they no longer can qualify for the low-cost housing and affordable housing, and they don't want to go somewhere else. The problem is that the economics of assisted living is such that traditionally you would need a large parcel that would be very hard to find here. If we could find an appropriate parcel, I think it's absolutely something that should be looked at. I think that's going to be a difficulty. Given that, I think we need to look at, can we create things that are similar or similar enough? How many, we already bring in a large amount of the needs of assisted living into homes where we have Meals on Wheels. How far can we go? It's quite possible that we can get fairly far that even if we don't create the assisted living, we'll be able to find both town, and I suspect a lot of it will be charitable organizations that can bring, whether it's medical visits or food visits, to the homes itself, and that might fill some of that need.
Jeff?
You know, I think assisted living is a very desirable use to have in the town, but I'm also a guy who's very experienced in the zoning and planning field, and we have to be careful about not only the uses that we don't like, that everybody gets mad at, you know, the buildings that, like in Wayne-Scott, that was built too close to the road, but equally important, we've got to be concerned that we have a fair and impartial zoning review process for the projects we do like, because that sometimes municipalities, when they want some project very much, tend to try to slide it through, and that's when mistakes happen. So I think we've got a great planning board, I think we've got a great planning department, and we've certainly got the resources through human services and other agencies to locate and see whether we can find locations. You know, this is partly a different feeling that I have about being a leader. It's not like you come to the town board and say, here's the solution, I've thought about this solution and this is where it goes. I know from lawyering these kinds of cases how important it is to listen to people. No matter how well prepared I am, there's always somebody in that audience that, you know, pipes up and nails the subject from the back of the room. And these things have to evolve naturally. We have to have meetings where people come in, where we pick potential sites, where we hear what local people with local knowledge have to say about it, and we put it through a stringent planning process, just like we would if it was, you know, a less desirable use. So I have to say, no, I don't have a specific location. I think it's a use that is important. I don't think it should be a 3-story use. Some of them are because there's limited mobility that's got to fit in East Hampton. But I believe first and foremost in the planning process that I've worked in for 25 years. Let's let that work.
Kathee?
I actually have some experience with assisted living. My mom, as I said earlier, is 95 years old, and we tried her in assisted living, and unfortunately, the model didn't work for her. But for those that it does work for, it's an incredible experience. I think when my time comes, having gone to college and lived in a dorm, I think I could adjust to living in an assisted living. My mother went from her parents' house to her moved in with my dad when they got married, so she didn't like the communal living so much. But it's for some people, it's really a tremendous experience. The facility she was in was 2 stories with a basement, and but it's costly. You know, it was about $8,000 a month. So, and they don't take, you know, health insurance or whatever. We didn't have long-term care insurance for her at the time. So, you know, it's for folks that maybe that are like how Peconic Landing works, where you sell your home and then you know, can afford that kind of monthly bill. I'm not sure our zoning code, though, actually right now, as it stands, allows for assisted living. That's something we would have to look into. But I would definitely be open to a public-private partnership, and I would be very much interested in vetting it with the community.
Zach?
Next question?
It's Jeff, I think.
No,
Didn't
yes,
I
it's
just-
Jeff,
I
yeah.
just answered.
Next question.
Offshore wind farms are coming. What are your views on the Deepwater project? Initially calling for 15 turbines 30 miles off Montauk. How do you reconcile the need for clean power with the preservation of the fishing industry?
I think offshore wind, it holds great possibilities for us. And again, it sort of reminds me of the answer I just gave on the last question. I think I've listened to the commercial fishermen raise objections to the possibility that there'd be damage to fishing grounds. And I think it's a legitimate concern that has to be examined through a careful, objective, transparent environmental review process. I mean, we in East Hampton have to know before we go. It's a big project. It involves blasting the seabed, and I'd like to know the real facts. We've had a bunch of public meetings, and I've attended a few of them, and they're good meetings because people can come in and they can express their views, but they tend to be a little bit sort of venting meetings. And really, when it comes down to it, these decisions are made in a sort of methodical way with a transparent record where we have experts talking about it. So I support renewable energy. I don't think we should get complacent and say, well, if we support deep water, everything's going to be fine. There are ways that we can actually cut down the spikes in energy use that we have that are causing us to use generators out in Montauk. And there's simple things that we probably learned back in high school when we were all there, which is we need conservation. There's new battery technology that we can actually use in homes. We need solar, and we need solar arrays in East Hampton, and we should work on it. There are great deals now that the state is offering so that you can get financing to put solar on your roof. And if we can just, and those smart meters, the smart thermostats are a terrific way. If we can just control the spikes that we had for the 2 or 3 days in August, we can do a tremendous job in upping the percentage of renewable energy that we use. So I think we have to have a multifaceted approach, small approaches, and we've got to do better in our own homes, and we can do it. We can do it.
Thank you. So I support the South Fork Wind Project. As folks may know, Deepwater has leased 265 acres from the federal government. Right now, they're working with the fishing community of where to site the 15 turbines. Yes, they're going to be 30 miles off of Montauk, but they're below the horizon, so you're not going to see it when you look out from the point. And as I said, they're working with the fishermen to find out and map where the fertile fishing grounds are so that those turbines don't disturb fertile fishing grounds. What we've learned from, in Europe and what's happening in Block Island is that those turbines create a reef and fish, live there. And we find that for the recreational fishermen, it's actually a boon for them because there's a lot of great fishing there. You'll be able, the way they'll be spaced out, the commercial fishermen will be able to go in between the turbines. The big challenge was that we heard back was where are we going to land the cable when it comes to East Hampton? And originally they were looking at 2 landing sites on the north side, on the bay side, and the fishermen said that that would be too disruptive to their livelihood. So now they're exploring a landing site in Hither Hills, Nampeak Lane, and Beach Lane. We actually, at the Wainscott CAC at the last meeting, had Deepwater come and attend because Beach Lane, is right down the block from the chapel where we meet. And we had a very lengthy discussion on it. From what I understand, what they were looking to do is not only minimize what happens in the fishing community, but also minimize once it comes to land. They're looking for a landing site that works from a geological standpoint, that where they can not go through rocks, so they can go through sand. So the cable would be buried very deeply, and they would take into account sea level rise. And Beach Lane has actually been quite attractive because they can go up to the MTA right away and take it right to the Cove Hollow station.
I think everybody in this room is going to support more clean, green energy. However, I find it a little premature to put a full stamp of approval on the project. If you speak to the Deepwater people, I've had a couple of private meetings, and the most informative meeting was the harbor management group of the trustees held the one meeting I've been to that wasn't a venting session, where they brought their scientists, and some very serious dialogue took place. You realize at that meeting when the scientists presented it, they're really not that far along yet, or moderately along on their science. And as they said, we have about 20 or 20, somewhere between 20 and 26 approvals left to go, reviews. I think, one, we want to influence those as best we can. The town only has limited ability to influence them. But Europe has put out guidelines of how you review these things, with about 80 questions that one should ask, and what are the answers like. In general, I think it's a wonderful idea. I do worry about several other things. I do not want to see solar displaced, and there was a decision by the Public Utilities Corporation in New York in March that greatly changed the in upcoming years, the advantages of solar, and PSEG has the right to reduce some of the incentives. The town should be lobbying PSEG not to reduce some of those net metering incentives. And I will say, though, the advantage of going to a sort of an open, let's really discuss this session with the trustees is, I just have to throw this out. It's such a wonderful idea. One of the lobstermen said, forget that, buy Plum Island, put all your windmills up on Plum Island, and so put solar anywhere else that you're not putting up the windmills.
Next question?
This is sort of a three-part question.
Okay.
What is the long-range prognosis for downtown Montauk? What solutions can there be in the face of rising sea levels? And what was your position regarding the use of sandbags and the recent beach restoration there?
Steve, could you do this?
Yeah,
Could you just do the three again?
The question was, what is the long-range prognosis for downtown Montauk? What solutions can there be in the face of rising sea levels? What was your position regarding the use of sandbags and the recent beach restoration?
Okay, I'm going to start from the last question and go the other way, if you don't mind. So, because the way I see the Montauk, downtown Montauk, is I look at it as a three-phase approach. The first phase was that right after Superstorm Sandy, we saw that the septic rings that had been buried by the Royal Atlantic Hotel to protect their hotel, all the sand had washed away and they were exposed. And we saw that the water was lapping at the foundation. So we had an options, funding mechanism was put into place, and we had an opportunity to do a project, a short-term project with the Army Corps of Engineers. And they came out and said, you do nothing or you do rock. Prior to our getting elected, or my getting elected, the town board at the time, the Wilkinson administration, had passed a resolution saying that they wanted the Army Corps to look at geotextiles. So they came back and said that they would create a project with geotextile bags. All I had to do was, you have to do is turn on the television today and you look at Houston and you see how devastating that is. With climate change, the storms are more severe. I believe they're saying Houston is an 800-year storm. So I couldn't sleep at night not protecting downtown Montauk until the sand replenishment project came through, which is, I look at it as the phase 2 project. The FIM project is phase 2, where we'll get a sand replenishment project. And then phase 3 is the CARP study that we're doing now, the coastal resiliency, where we're going to have to look at buying out some of those properties, you know, and relocating them, retreat. So hopefully that answers all three of your three-part question.
Could you repeat the middle one?
What solutions can there be
Okay,
in the face of rising sea levels?
okay. Okay, so, let's see. The long-term prognosis, it's wonderful to be in a room in which I don't have to argue with climate skeptics, which occasionally I do even on some of my committees. And so I think all of us understand that the reality is that the sea level is going to rise, and it's a classic case that is evaluating, you know, risk under uncertainty. We don't know exactly how much. In general, you have to prepare. You don't wait until you've had that disaster. So clearly one of the things is rather simply, you do generally relocate, you move to higher ground. I did take one class in designing with nature from University of Delft. It's amazing what you can do online these days. Who generally recommend that they have a lot of similar problems. Large amounts of sand that you put you would put them up the coast, and you use nature itself to try to keep replenishing the beach instead of doing it every few years. Still, that doesn't mean you don't move away. So, don't have a lot more time. Sandbags, if people have followed my writings, I think in 2013 I wrote a letter called Sand is Gold, and that'll be the next gold dust of the Hamptons. I don't trust the Army Corps by themselves. Recommended that we always had outside consultants, and ultimately came out and said what they did to us was a bait and switch. They originally came in, it was going to be $25 million, and then all of a sudden we're only getting $6-7 million. There's sometimes when doing a portion of a project is not the right way to go, and unless we were going to throw in a lot more money for a lot more sand, I recommended against it.
Well, I have the luxury of not having been on the town board when the decision was made, so you'll forgive me for Monday morning quarterbacking. But when I heard about it, I did not support the idea of the geotubes on the beach, because I've been around in town planning since 1985, and because I'm an active lawyer in the zoning and planning world, I actually read those reports and I use them in my work. And I know that all the long-range planning in the town of East Hampton is against any kind of shore hardening. So no, I don't support it. But I want to say, I wasn't on the hot seat when the decision was made, and I have the comfort of sitting in this room and knowing that the storm wasn't that bad. But I do think that, I'm glad that Mr. Cohen mentioned his letter about sand being gold, because he also wrote another letter around the same time in October in which he did in fact endorse the use of these geotubes on the beach. That was on October 7th to the 2013 to the Star, saying that the use of sandbags or sand-filled geotubes might give extra protection to motel owners and the frontline businesses in Montauk. I really think the more important issue is what are we going to do going forward, and that's what Kathee alluded to, and that is that this is a transition step to get an all-sand replenishment plan, which is what they call the Fire Island to Montauk plan. And the Army Corps drove a hard bargain with the town and said, we're not going to include Montauk in the plan unless you let us put these sandbags on the beach. So it wasn't ideal as a long-term solution. But I want to tell you something about democracy, which I really liked. I watched the CARP meetings, the Coastal Area Resiliency Plan meetings, and everybody's angry and everybody's yelling at each other, and they've got scientists there. And at one point, somebody said, I was in Katrina and I saw bodies 16 feet in the trees. And the scientist, who's a PhD, they're not usually this creative, said, you know what? We're not going to give in to apathy, and we're not going to give in to fear. We're going to use scientific data to make our decisions. I'm getting a stop sign. But it really energize me to see citizens and this government doing the tough, hard, long-term planning on these huge issues, these big issues of sea rise. And
Thank you, Jeff.
doing it well.
Jeff, thank you.
So,
Wait,
yes,
go.
yeah, so I'd like to respond to what Jeff said. When it's true, Wilkinson put forth an idea that was rocks, but at the same time, that was a time when we were gonna get $25 million and a huge amount of sand put on there. I went out personally, this is in 2013, and held personal talks with Paul Monti and with Chip Duryea, who of course had a lot of influence at that time, and said, how far can we reduce this? They weren't willing to go to all sand, so I said, can we reduce it to geobags? Would you refer that? Compared to rocks, which was our other choice in 2013, and what was going on with Supervisor Wilkinson, it was a good choice. What I also said was that once the Army Corps then did the bait and switch and dropped it down to only a small amount of sand, I wrote a letter that said, now what is proposed is a steep pump with a sandbox in front of it, and we shouldn't do it. So,
Okay, next question.
How would you address the increased deer and resulting tick-borne illness problems we face?
well, so the first thing, we're gonna have to separate things because it's the relationship between deer and tick-borne illnesses is much more complicated to put it all on the deer. This is clearly the most contentious issue I've ever dealt with. The Nature Reserve Committee, which I chair, has always traditionally handled deer management, so I'm naturally the chair of the deer management. And I think that one of the most important things is to not look at it as a deer problem. You have to look at the situation of that we have a number of problems and deer are implicated. And they're very serious problems. We collect very good data now on the number of deer and vehicle collisions, and we know that we picked up last year 475 dead deer carcasses off the road. So we're not even counting the ones that go into the woods and die. This is true. You do not want to see deer die by cars, and you you don't want the drivers getting those experiences. So I'm going to have to go fast here. I want to talk about what I support. I've always supported the right of the local hunters and the use of local hunters on local properties for deer management. I also am the one person, I think, who has written the DEC with a proposal to try to install 4 posters that would then become a attraction to the deer and try and experiment with immunocontraceptives and non-lethal. Unfortunately, I've sent it to the DEC twice, and I know the people there, they refuse to answer. In terms of the Lyme disease, I do sit on the county's town tick control advisory committee. I think, what am I going to say? Sorry.
Thank you, stop.
Okay, I gotta move fast here. I've been hit by a deer in the car, and I know it was the deer's fault. It was not my fault. I don't like the collisions. It's obviously dangerous. No one likes it. But I don't have deer fencing in my house. I live in the woods, and I tend to be a little bit more laissez-faire. I feel like I moved to the woods, and they have some role there, basically. So, and on Lyme disease, we know the vector to human beings is really the white-footed mouse, and Gamonex is a scientifically established method to break that chain of causation. So we should all be throwing these tubes in the yard. I'm not sure that deer really connect that well to actual human transmission. But here's the thing, again. I'm a guy who's been a lawyer, and I've been in front of boards really all my career here, and I've represented the boards all my career. We get things done in town by having open hearings where we present real evidence and facts. I want to move forward on issues, on all issues, based on facts, not fear. And I would also like to try to get us to stop shouting at each other a little bit, because I think we make better progress when we talk to each other and listen to each other. And on the deer situation, I don't know if there's a deer problem, but I'm perfectly willing to get in a room with a fair, open hearing where everybody can present their view and we get some science done so we decide what the deal is. I know there's been a lot of criticism of the Deer Committee, that it's stacked in favor of hunters, and I've heard this from people who don't favor hunters, that they feel it's not an objective and fair committee. I believe in an objective, fair committee where everybody gets to say, we may not walk out of the room agreeing with everyone, but I think people feel better when they know they've been heard. So I say, let's do that, let's find out if there is a deer problem, and then go to step 2, use the same process, and try to decide what we can do. There are other methods to control population. We can shoot darts at them that have hormones in them that don't generate it into the ecosystem. But in general, we got to know before we go.
Thank you. I believe it was the fall of 2014 that the Group for Good Government invited me to a meeting on a Saturday afternoon with my colleague, Fred Overton. And I was there to talk about the airport, and he was there to talk about deer. And I thought the fireworks were all going to happen when we discussed the airport, and I could not have been more wrong. People lit up when we started talking about deer because unfortunately too many of them had had instances where either them or a loved one had had a collision with a deer. And you know, in my 4 years on the board, I have supported expanding hunting. I have neighbors down the block that have a freezer in their garage that, you know, feed their family over the winter with venison. But I will say that I did not support the sterilization project that they did in the village. That was a bit horrifying to me. But I will also say, as far as tick-borne illness is concerned, we all have, you know, family members, friends, neighbors, colleagues that are struggling with a tick-borne illness. We know that it's an epidemic. Fortunately, Stony Brook Southampton Hospital has stepped forward. So is our elected officials, Senator Gillibrand on the national level, County Legislator Bridget Fleming on the county level. And what I'd like to do, and I've spoken to Diane Patrizio, who's the Director of Human Services, and what I'd like to do is do a panel here in East Hampton, and hopefully Dennis here at the library will let us use this room and you know, have a panel and talk more about it, because we really need education at this point.
Okay, we're going to have 3 more questions so that each person gets one to start with, and then we'll wrap it up. So can we have the next question, please?
Yes. Sometimes a small but vocal group opposes a public or private project that benefits the broader community. How do you balance these competing interests?
I'm not sure if that was referring to a particular project, but you know, I hate to talk about process because it tends to put people to sleep, but I'm a lawyer. And I've learned, you know, that it doesn't really pay to be the smartest guy in the room. It's just not the way people make decisions. So, you know, and I deal with controversial development cases all over East Hampton and in Bridgehampton. I just last winter stopped a shopping center in Bridgehampton, and that pitted some strong interests against us. And, you know, I rely on good old-fashioned facts, basically. I don't try to make myself out to be the smartest guy. I don't try to promote myself. I find, you know, I often have to fight in front of boards just for time to talk. So I fight 2 battles. The first battle is, please let me talk, because they don't want this project or they do want this project. Then the second is, I can talk about the substance of the case. And I just find, in general, when people settle down and give each other the time and we can exchange facts, we tend to make decisions on rational grounds. And no, everybody can't be happy. Sometimes people are not going to be happy. The bus terminal case is an example of this, which I've gotten a little flack from my friend Zach over on the end here, because I was hired by a neighborhood group to look at possible harms that would occur if we put a terminal there. We found out it was right adjacent to public water supply wells. So I represented for water. I didn't represent a particular neighborhood. My view was, if you have a project that could poison water, that's an absolute red light on that project. And the people at Springs are worried about traffic. There are many positives about this project. It wouldn't put traffic on in the summertime. It prevents a commercial use from being there. You don't have a scavenger waste plant handling human waste, and the buses are already going up there. I think the more we listen to each other and talk to each other calmly, some of those differences go away. And people who think they didn't get their way are more pleased because they were heard.
Kathee?
I guess the first thing that comes to mind when you ask about a smaller focal group that could disrail it was when we were working on the rental registry. There were folks that came out at public hearings that were very opposed to the rental registry. And if you had just listened to the public comment, you might think that this is not something that the town board should pursue. But the reality was there was a silent majority that supported it. And I think that that's, Jeff speaks to listening, and that is, critical. And that's something, in fact, Joe and I are always telling our kids that you learn more when you listen, and we're always stressing that. And so it's about listening to people, and I brought people in from both sides, and worked with folks that were not in favor of it, but when they understood why we wanted to do it, and explain that, and they felt heard, and you get very far when you give people that kind of respect and that kind of access to projects.
Thank you. I've often felt we should have a concept called like balanced hamlets, where in addition to the comprehensive plan, you would look at saying, well, we need this amount of recreation in this hamlet, this amount of affordable housing, this amount of nature preserves. And that can help if a town board in saying to these groups, well, look, we've just bought 15 nature preserves in your hamlet. It's part of our policy or guidelines. We need to move forward with some of these other projects. I've learned a few tricks along the way. In the Nature Preserve Committee, we often nominate properties for being on nature preserves and often move them on to other departments when we think they're not suitable. It's generally easy in terms of putting things up for nature preserve, but still, we almost never put up a single one at a time. And I think that would also work well for some of these more controversial projects, whether it's recreation. Don't just go once and put one project in one hamlet and then let that entire hamlet, say, organize against it. If you've got multiple projects going in multiple hamlets, it becomes much harder to argue about it shouldn't be happening here, because you commonly hear, we love the idea, but it's in the wrong place. Ultimately, though, part of being a leader is both providing education, trying to honor each person's, not just listen, but honor each person's views on the subject, negotiating, moving people along, and then ultimately sometimes you just need backbone and say, we understand your concerns, but this is what we're going to do.
A red card? Okay.
I just want to make a commitment nobody's asked me to make, because it's been an important part of the way I practice law and the way I feel about the community, which is that it's my home. And that is, I won't play politics with planning issues. I was a planning board attorney back in 1985, 88, in that range, when planning was at its worst here. It was the most intense conflict we've had. And I used to go up to Tom Thorson, who was the town planner, in the midst of these controversies, and the environmentalists were tugging me one way, and the applicants were tugging me another way. And I said, Tom, just give me the straight facts, because that'll enable me to make the decision. I say that we make planning decisions in this town based on facts, not fear. And we don't play politics with planning. And we don't turn one neighborhood against another neighborhood by calling something a disaster before we know the facts about it. People need time to absorb the facts. And when they do, we're going to get more cooperation. And that's what I'm looking to do on the town board.
Okay. Our next question.
This is a budget and finance question. What would you do to preserve the town's excellent AAA Moody rating?
I know the answer.
Can we keep Larry on? No, the fact is, it's, the budget meetings, as I said earlier, we all have liaisons to different departments, and we've actually just gone through the 2018 budget meetings with the liaisons. I sat through and contributed to the airport, the human services, and the information technology, and my colleagues, did with their liaisons as well. I think what we have a tremendous team in place. Len Bernard is an incredible budget director. He's got a wealth of experience. Charlene Cagle, who's our chief auditor, again, she's been in, worked in public sector for decades, and she brings so much to the table. And we just have a very good working relationship with our department heads. So when they came in this year to talk about the 2018 budget, everybody had realistic expectations. The tax cap, we've been talking about it, it's the 2% tax cap. Well, it's actually not 2%, it's 1.2% this year. And our health insurance premiums are going to be up 13% this year. So, fortunately, we made a decision a number of years ago, and it was the right decision, to close the scavenger waste plant. That saves us annually about $800,000 a year. So that gives us some wiggle room. I've always said that the budget is a reflection of the community's priorities or what we value. And, we just have a great team in place. And, even when Larry retires, which will be a sad day, I'm confident that we will keep the Moody's AAA budget rating up.
Zach?
Thank you. Well, certainly Larry and his town board have done a fabulous job, and at least for a few years, that question shouldn't be too hard. So the issue is really looking ahead. Looking ahead, there are also some good things. One, we're finally going to put behind us the bonds that we borrowed for the deficit financing. I believe they're going to come due both between around 2018 and 2021. And fortunately, that's not a recurring need, such as like roads and things like that. So that's going to free up a little bit of room to be able to, if we do have major infrastructure needs, whether it's for the coastal erosion issues or others, there'll be a little bit of opening there without actually increasing the amount of debt. Another thing I would do now that we've been running some very large surpluses is to look at our reserve funds. Reserve funds essentially are used to balance out spikes so that when you are doing very well, it's just like bank accounts. You put it aside, and if you get shocks that you weren't expecting, then you take it back out. And one of the shocks we have to be worried about somewhere down the line is the mortgage tax. We collect a huge amount of money that's based on people taking out mortgages from real estate. Real estate, as we all know, goes up and down here, and the amount of purchases go up and down. So in general, we're very good, but we just need to be cautious of the parts of the budget that can be variable, both in terms of revenue and expenses. And I think we're in an excellent position if we have that cautious eye.
Oh boy, we've got a couple of financial whizzes here. I have a larger view of it. I mean, I'm happy that we got this rating. It's a long time in coming, and the Democratic team worked pretty hard to reach it. And along the way, they negotiated a couple of union agreements, contract agreements. So I just wanted to throw in a comment that, I didn't hear any, complaining and wailing or threatening that we were going to cut services or that, we really needed to, cut things to the bone and look over the social services that the town provides. And to me, that's very heartening, because that's the Democratic way, frankly, where we don't hedge our bets on our values. So I'm glad to hear that we're proud of our financial achievements without hearing the stuff that usually comes along with it, like, oh, we had to cut some social services and we cut union pay and we, times are hard. And that cheers me up, because for me as a taxpayer, but also because I've got a 29-year-old son who I think would probably like to live here. And this is the kind of solid road that that Democrats can put themselves on without getting all pious about we have to cut taxes for the richest and we can't provide for people that need services. And I think the town's we could do a little better on some of the services. I think we could do better on youth services in particular. We could focus on that. But we're doing a good job of providing services. We've negotiated tough agreements, and they're building equity. They're refinancing their loans, and That is called a democratic success, and I'm glad to say it about finances, because usually the other side is claiming they got the answers. They don't have the answers. This is the answer, and one of them's sitting over here, and his name's Larry Campbell.
Okay? Oh, you're
Well,
rebutting that.
I just used my red card. We have such a good story to tell. There's something else I wanted to add. Zach touched on it. When we got into office, we had $120 million in indebtedness. Right now, we're at about $100 million. And with the plan that we have in place, we're on track in the next couple of years to be down to $85,000. In the meantime, we're still looking to build a new senior citizen center, on Springs Fireplace Road, which we sorely need. And as Jeff said, we're investing in our community and in our infrastructure. We've done, renovations to the restrooms at Indian Wells. We've done it at Ditch Plains. And, Steve Lynch is staying on top of the roads. And you can invest and manage money smartly. And we've done that.
Since each candidate has used its two red card uses, I can truthfully tell you that we're going to be very much on time with the last question.
It's a two-part question. Do you think the town supervisor should serve a 4-year term? And what do you think of term limits?
I see pros and cons of having the supervisor serve a 4-year term unless we made other changes. Clearly, that whole sense of continuity that I talked about with the town manager, part of that would be helped. One of the issues I have, and it may not be seem so important to other people, but right now the system is such that one party, or let's say a group who has a certain philosophy, can entirely replace an opposing party, an opposing view. That has certain advantages in a democracy that sort of keeps one side, not being too complacent. And that would be the one thing I'd want to think about. I clearly see the disadvantage of the 2-year term. You sit there and you're campaigning by the time you just got started up and running. And so that part makes sense to me. As I said, the only thing I'd want to think about would be giving up the fact that one side, and we've seen ones that we've liked and one we haven't liked, that can replace the other. Term limits, I would want them to be at least fairly long. I have seen in some cases where I felt that a town board member maybe became too complacent, and the fact that they're on for 4 years, if you start becoming complacent in your first year, it's a lot of wasted time to sit there. I would consider it probably somewhere either a 2 or 3-year term for the town board.
I'm not a big fan on term limits. I actually think the best term limit is called an election. And I'm all in favor of just making people accountable in elections. I will say that, and frankly, the short term that the supervisor has makes the supervisor accountable at a shorter interval, and I think it makes him more accountable. And he's got some responsibilities that we might want to check in on, these budgeting responsibilities, and we've had some problems in the past on that. So I'm okay with a 2-year term for him, and I think elections are fine. Where I've seen term limits that might be helpful in local government is on appointed boards. We have planning boards and we have zoning boards, and I can't say I've seen this problem in the town of East Hampton, but in other jurisdictions, I have seen where they have board chairmen that have remained on the boards for 20, 25 years. And believe me, things change a lot in 25 years. I had one guy in Southampton who used to love to tangle with me. We had sort of a friendly fight every time I appeared. And I was really gratified when he finally got off the board. And the village of Southampton right now is having a political revolution. And they're looking at their board members, not their elected members. They're looking at their appointed board members that have a huge amount of power in your town. And I could see some term limits on those appointed boards like the ZBA and the planning board. because they really affect day-to-day development in your community, and it can be abused.
Starting with term limits, I don't believe there should be term limits. I agree with Jeff, that's why we have elections. Let the voters decide, who gets reelected for the town board every 4 years. And as far as the supervisor candidate is concerned, I'm comfortable with a 2-year term. I wouldn't want to be the town board member running without someone at the top of the ticket. And I think that it builds, you work as a team, and so I would agree with staying with the 2-year term for the supervisor and not having term limits for the other offices.
Kathee, can I borrow your microphone?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I found out that my microphone wasn't working. I just want to wake everybody up in the back, give you some hope that we're soon going to end. And we'll start now with the summations for 1 minute for each of the candidates, starting reverse. We'll have Zach go first.
That's a relief. Why am I running for a town board seat? First, I believe I am qualified. I've been asked to chair many organizations and committees because people feel that I am a good leader. Good leadership sets an ethical standard and brings out the best in everyone. Second, through my 15 years of community service, I have learned how the town works, how it sometimes does not work, and how to get things done. On a personal level, I am running because I care about the people of our town. Several times a month, I review what I have done. With luck, there will be a tangible event to review. I may have helped a Girl Scout troop study nature or an elderly woman apply for an affordable accessory apartment. If I feel that I've helped my community, I am likely to smile, feel the satisfaction that only comes from helping others, and say to myself, I must continue.
Me? You want to?
Well, we can have Jeff go.
All right, let's do reverse. Okay. All right, over the past 4 years, I've had the honor and privilege of serving the people of East Hampton. During this time, I've worked hard to address the serious issues that we face as a community, protecting the quality of our drinking water, surface waters, and harbors and bays, addressing climate change and sea level rise, encouraging clean, renewable energy, fighting for local control of the East Hampton Airport, providing affordable housing opportunities for local working families, balancing our budget, improving mental health services for our youth, and providing essential services for our seniors. But what I'm most proud of is how I've worked with my colleagues to return dignity, respect, and civility to the business of the town board, encouraging public participation to assist in problem solving and more informed decision making, and restoring the community's confidence in town government. A stark contrast to what we see playing out in Washington. I'm asking for your vote in the Democratic primary on Tuesday, September 12th, so I can continue to address the pressing needs in our community.
I come to this from sort of a different perspective than the other two people on the dais. I fight battles, is what I do. Doesn't mean I'm a mean guy, it just means that I've chosen a legal career where I represent neighborhoods and ordinary residents who are concerned about overdevelopment, or they're concerned about the tear downs of historic buildings, or they're concerned about the oversized houses in the Amagansett lanes. They're concerned about the dune destruction on Shore Road, and they come to me for help. And they don't come to me for just talk. They come to me to get something done. And I fight the fights for them. And I do it because I listen to them, and I do it because I can translate their needs and their sometimes emotional objections into legal arguments that are persuasive. And I really enjoy it. And I've protected the landscape in ways that many of you don't even know. We stopped a shopping center last winter in Bridgehampton, an 85,000 square foot shopping center. Protected a historic building in Sag Harbor. That's the signature of Sag Harbor. These are things I want to do on town board. I want to get things done.
I want to first thank all of our candidates for a terrific job. I want to also thank all of you for coming. It's been tremendously gratifying for the League and for us at the GGG and the library to see this type of a turnout, which is really a terrific reflection of the interest and the acumen of the town residents. And finally, I'd like you to drive safely and go home, okay? Thanks, Jeff. Terrific.
Point about having a supervisor.